Доброго дня.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. We continue today's mini marathon concerning presentation on perception of Ukraine abroad. And this research was commissioned by the Ukrainian Institute together with Renaissance Foundation in mind, NGO, and also supported by the Ministry of Foreign stakeholders and the countries that participated are France, Germany, Poland, the USA, Japan, Turkey, and Hungary. And we would like to fill the gap concerning cultural diplomacy and to analyze thoughts and positions within expert communities in order to make our activity more informed, more well-grounded, and we really hope that policies should be based on verified data that were collected in a proper way. And our last panel and presentation of this first cycle of presentations. And the next presentations will be in several weeks, and we thank Ukraine Crisis Media Center for the hospitality and for being able to hold this presentation here and to broadcast this press briefing with simultaneous translation. And I'm a moderator, Volodymyr Sheiko, and I would like to introduce Hanna Shelest from Ukrainian Prism Council. Next is Serhii Plokhii, director of the Ukrainian Scientific Institute at Harvard University, and he has many scientific papers on Ukraine in the West. And Nalywajko, and she's the president of the Ukrainian Institute in America. And the aim of this institution is similar to the Ukrainian Institute. Goal is to increase awareness concerning culture, history, and traditions of Ukraine in the US. And I would like to say that the Ukrainian Institute of America implemented important function even when there was no Ukrainian statehood, and now this tradition continues, and new state institutions, they reinforce this activity, the institutions that appeared during the last 5 years. And today we have wonderful speakers, and they are remotely with us today. I'm here alone at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. And we start with the presentation of the results concerning perception of Ukraine in US. This is an ambitious task to analyze how Ukraine is perceived, attitude towards Ukraine by experts in US, in big country. And the task we had to broadly cover the spectrum of thoughts and opinions that found their place in this research. And I believe that the work of Ukrainian Prism that carried out the work in this country, it was really useful and valuable. I would like to give the floor to Hanna Shelest for presentation, to present her ideas, the main conclusions they reach, and then we will discuss this information. And you have an opportunity to ask questions. Please do this through Facebook on the page of the Ukrainian Institute, and we will voice your questions during Q&A session at the end of our meeting. We have 1 hour for our event. Hanna, you're given the floor. Thank you, Volodymyr. We thank Ukrainian Institute for this opportunity to speak the whole day about Ukraine abroad. We have wonderful co-panelists. And they were not participants of our expert interview. And it is really interesting to get their opinion about the research we carried out. The USA, they were the most complicated because the United States is a really versatile country. And due to peculiarities of US, in different places, people have different perception of Ukraine. And information that was provided through diaspora and through the media, this information differs from the information that was provided in other areas and big cities in the US. So we carried out a big research, and we invite everyone to see our quotations from our guests, from our respondents. And for me, it's a great honor that they provided their opinion. And we cannot name everyone, and you may see these quotations. You may use it in your work, in the work of the Institute, Embassy, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And these will be separate thoughts, separate conclusions we were able to reach in the course of this research. I will turn on my presentation in order to show information. For us, it was important to speak with experts, not only from Washington. We have Washington, New York, Chicago, Houston, and Los Angeles. We've chosen these biggest cities because we are really different, but there is interesting concentration of institutions or actors or those people who are involved in public diplomacy. Also, we were able to compare Ukrainian diaspora in these cities or different interaction with the Ukrainian actors. We clearly understand that political context dominates US in the recent years, and in any case, political things went to the front line, and we are going to speak more specifically. We will speak about separate conclusions we were able to reach. I hope that the presentation is already on the screen. So the first conclusion we've reached is that recently we had significant increase of knowledge about Ukraine in the US, but this is knowledge about political situation and the context connected with Russian aggression and war, and concerning Russian and Ukrainian relations, but low level of knowledge about Ukrainian culture. For example, if we are speaking about embroidered shorts and, for example, borscht or Golodomor, those topics were raised during recent years, and other topics, they are only dealt with by specialists. Common people do not know about these topics. Also, there were people who deal with museums, and many of them do not know the names connected with other areas of culture. Even the knowledge that they have, they are narrow for a small number of people. Also, a lot of information is connected with Russian Federation. This is not only about current situation. And Mr. Ambassador said that there are many Americans who work in think tanks or they are journalists, they all studied Russia first. That's why, for example, Scythians, this information was provided as a part of Russian history, and only now this information was revealed that to US that this is the part of Ukrainian history, not Russian. And also there are many different common things about Ukraine. Ukraine is perceived usually through the context of Russian Federation, post-Soviet culture. Sometimes they say that this is Eastern European dimension. Usually it is included in Russian or Soviet studies. And some specialists consider Ukraine in the context of southern eastern area. If you compare it with Turkey or Japan, the difference is that they didn't have the necessity to differentiate diaspora and local people. Diaspora is new there, and in the USA, due to the fact that diaspora is big and it has many generations, there is different understanding compared with the average Americans. And this is the diaspora. They want to be proud of their origin. They, for example, are the fourth generation of Ukrainians. They have emotional connection, and it is important for them. And many responded with non-material things. These are non-material things. They were more important. On the slide, we see that the most important topic is Euromaidan, corruption, that is on the news, annexation of Crimea, information war, any type of it, also freedom, because as of today, this understanding of freedom, dignity, some values, or human capital. This was also mentioned, that there is unique human potential, civil society. It was mentioned by those who work in political think tanks and those who work in cultural institutions. Also topic of Chernobyl. And HBO film about Chernobyl played a very big role in provision of information about Chernobyl. And some people do not understand to whom Chernobyl belonged to, but also there is different perception of borscht. And every second respondent said that after a series of articles in the American media about whether borscht is Russian or Ukrainian, they more clearly understand that borscht is an important element of Ukrainian culture. It is worth saying that all respondents said that for Americans, media and the information that is provided through the media, through mass culture, is really important, because even experts say what is on the news. And if Ukraine is on the news, everyone follows. And if Belarus is on top, so information about Ukraine then go to the background. So the narratives that are prevailing, these are political narratives. Washington, New York, and Chicago, they have more knowledge about Ukraine and its culture. These are the biggest. So New York, they have big cultural life, and Washington is the capital, and Chicago, there is Ukrainian institutions, there are Ukrainian institutions, Ukrainian diaspora, and Ukrainian radio, and in other places there are no. There is no Ukrainian diaspora, but there is Houston, and they have new diaspora. There is some assimilation with the overall post-Soviet community. About cultural phenomena, we expected it, and we say that the biggest number of cultural phenomenon, this was Maidan, and information about Golodomor and information about Holocaust. Many people in US said that this bridge with Jewish culture, with Jewish diaspora is really important. Ukraine should not differentiate from it because this is important for the public. It may help in the representation of Ukraine in US. Gogol, Shalom Aleichem, representatives of Ukrainian and Jewish culture, they are known. And painters are not known, especially if we are speaking about beginning of the 20th century. And only some people knew about them, but these are those people who directly deal with these issues. So this demonstrated low level of knowledge, and some respondents think that Ukraine should not promote these painters, and so and so we had a question about associations with the Ukrainian culture. Here we presented some names and titles. There were some unexpected things. Usually borscht is associated with Ukraine or with the Russian Federation.
The sound gets interrupted. In the US, we saw that borscht is very often associated with Poland, and the representatives of the Polish diaspora, the fourth generation, which actually have no contacts with historical Poland, they were saying, yeah, that's our childhood, we had it. And that is important. Who else are we talking about? We were talking about some others, representatives of Ukrainian culture. Sometimes people don't want to associate some persons with any country. Kazimir Malevich, who's very popular in the US, the sound got interrupted, sorry. No input.
Шановні глядачі,
I believe that the connection got interrupted with Hanna. Now we are trying to bring her back. But, and not to stop, I would like to ask Serhii a question. And the question is, Ukrainian presence in the US has a different nature from Ukrainian presence in many other countries. In the beginning, I mentioned that in the US, for dozens of years, there have been institutions, cultural, research, museum, archives, which before the independence and after the independence of Ukraine were disseminating the knowledge about Ukraine and the Northern America and the US. I would like to ask you how the results that we've heard about from Hanna. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? We were restoring the connection. Now I ask the question to Serhii, and then we will proceed with the presentation. Serhii, to what extent these results reflect the activity of the institutions, Northern American, the US, Ukrainian institutions, and how much you can follow the influence of these institutions there? Yes, we can see the influence if you look at people who were interviewed. Then we see that the institutions are present which did not, which couldn't exist without the financial support of diaspora. I'm the director of Ukrainian Research Institute of Harvard University. It wouldn't exist without the support of Ukrainian community or diaspora. And that is true talking about most of the institutions. The interest to the support of cultural projects existed before. The interest was related to certain waves, but nevertheless, Ukraine is in a privileged situation compared to other Eastern European countries because of the efforts of the diaspora. We are the model for actions of other groups like the state of Poland. It's difficult to exaggerate how important diaspora was in creating these institutions. And that is the platform that Ukraine has, and it has to use it for cooperation. Okay, we will continue later with you, Serhii. I have several more questions, but let's go back to Hanna. Hanna, thank you. I will not show the slides. I can tell without the slides. Talking about phenomena, we understand that we have big gaps, cultural gaps, especially in what is related to personalities. The biggest phenomena is embroidered blouse, vyshyvanka. Vyshyvanka became famous because of the current modern industry, because of the Hollywood stars who were dressed in famous Ukrainian brands in vyshyvankas. And there was a comment that possibly fashion is one of the spheres which Ukraine has to promote in the US because that's of interest. We just need to use this moment. As to less researched topics, you were talking about what is close to you. I cannot say that. Well, we were talking about the necessity to learn Ukrainian experience in fighting with hybrid threats and the information war. we were talking about the necessity to know about Ukrainian creative industries, also the knowledge of Ukrainian contemporary literature and films, but at least some abstracts from new Ukrainian books are to be translated so that American publishing houses decide on whether that's interesting or not. The initiative should come from Ukraine. As to the food, many are talking about that. Many respondents were in Ukraine. They emphasized that these trips were important for their understanding and perception of Ukraine. One of the first associations was food, and then Serhii and the architecture of Kiev cathedrals, and this emotional, visual, taste associations created a very positive image by which they were perceiving everything related to Ukraine. You mentioned that Crimean Tatar culture is to be more presented. What's interesting, you were talking about the necessity of collaboration with other institutions. The collaboration with the museum, Jewish museum or Jewish institutions, Ukrainian artists are to be present not just in Ukrainian galleries, but in the Museum of Contemporary Arts, so that they are included into the general contest. And all the respondents also mentioned that Ukraine is competing seriously with other cultures in the US. It's not just the competition with Poland or Czech Republic, but it's about competition with French, Italian culture, because that is perceived as something else in the US. And some respondents were saying that they do not associate it, like first association, France cheese, Italy wine, but they couldn't say what Ukraine is associated with. And they were saying that we don't have a single brand which would be translated or which would be disseminated in the US. What else can we be talking about? The US have many contacts with Ukraine, and that's positive for us compared to other countries of the world. These contacts are being established, but as to new cooperation, it's important to understand where funding comes from, and also the contact with the state is of importance. They don't say that state programs, that's something bad. They say that there should be funds for some educational programs, but as to associations, Ukrainian Institute in America, it's both plus and minus for Ukrainian Institute in Ukraine. It's positive because Ukrainian Institute is very famous, but American Institute is famous. It's well known, that's positive association, but because of that, when we are talking about Ukrainian Institute, then some respondents were thinking, okay, we visited them, but then when you mentioned that that's Ukrainian institution, they realized that there's some misunderstanding. So when you go to American market, you need to think about what to do with that. That's the positive, something positive which could help. And then the problem that our respondents were talking about, that Ukrainian public diplomacy was directed towards Ukrainian community, diaspora, and the main target audience were representatives of diaspora. But even the representatives of diaspora said that that was a big minus, because you should not explain to them what Ukraine is. They have some understanding of that, they're interested. Everyone was saying that Ukrainian should go wider. Ukraine should go to other Americans. They shouldn't be limited by diaspora, so that there's no feeling that it's large and it's a large audience that would produce some result. That is something that many were mentioning. I will not mention such things that we know about, like that there was a serious serious Russian information campaign in the US. That is what we know. And now briefly some recommendations of our survey. First is to expand the audience. We mentioned that. Second, it's necessity to create Ukrainian research institutions in other universities, New York and Harvard. That's great, but that's not enough, taking into account the size of the US. Like the university in South California, they were saying that they're interested in having Ukrainian studies. Also, a lot was mentioned about collaboration, about some joint projects. Americans are interested in joint production of films or publishing books, joint surveys, exchange programs, work with archives. The work of Jewish diaspora is to be enhanced, and Jewish history, both positive and negative, is to be used, because the target audience, which is interested in contacts with the historic motherland, they are quite influential in cultural community. Everyone was saying that it's important to get Jewish community involved. So then contemporary arts, contemporary Ukraine is what could be of interest for Americans. If it is Ukrainian cuisine, it should be something similar to what Evgen Klopotenko offers, something that shows not archaic Ukraine but contemporary Ukraine. Americans love to hear, just like Japanese, they like to hear. They don't want to hear about tragic pages. They want to hear about some success stories about the future. And this context is very interesting for them. A lot was mentioned about necessity of PPP. The projects which could be of interest for Americans cost money, and the efforts of the state and the private business are to be combined. You remember some oligarchs who were trying to lobby certain issues in the US, so the image of the company that would help is very important, because Americans are very serious as to reputation of such company. Also, virtual sphere could be of interest for Americans now when borders are closed. But there are some virtual museums. Opening Ukraine via virtual space for Americans could become of great interest. Fashion, that's what we mentioned, restaurant, but here there's a lot of competition. I can give you an example of Georgian restaurant in Washington, D.C., which has become very popular. Ukraine could do the same. And contemporary music. You mentioned Dacha Bracha, Anuka, and other projects which combine ethnic and modern music. And this combination is what could be of most interest for Americans. Thank you, Hanna, for your attempt to put it all in one presentation. I understand that you have many more findings. Now we invite everyone who's interested in this survey, please read the report on the website of Ukrainian Institute. And I would like to make a bridge to Serhii. Hanna, you said that it is important to enlarge the audience. At the same time, we understand that resources of the Ukrainian Institute and resources which exist in the state of Ukraine are not unlimited. We need to be very flexible with how we use this resource. We need to prioritize the topics with which we work and the geography. In the context of any country, we have a dilemma. Do we work for a large mass audience and we communicate mass product from Ukraine, or we concentrate on more narrow expert audience, which then become the multiplier of knowledge about Ukraine, and they disseminate the knowledge about Ukraine in their intellectual or professional networks. We have this discussion on what type of cultural diplomacy should it be. It should be mass diplomacy or more intellectual, which goes deeper into some cultural niches. Serhii, could you please provide comments? I believe in the US, the power of expert and media environment is very influential, talking about developing the public opinion, and we see that especially in the US. How to choose between either or maybe it should be and. I believe that the answer should be and. But if it's so, then the proportion of this cocktail is of importance. You mentioned human resources, financial resources. I would add time resources that are limited. We need to select a priority. I believe the priority should be expert communities, some cultural communities. Contacting and cooperating with them, we do not lose the opportunity to influence wider audience in the US or in any other country. I believe that still we need to emphasize these things, taking into account all our resources. And also I mentioned the limited time resource. Ukraine is in the news. Not just experts are interested in Ukraine. Our neighbors know about Ukraine. Ukraine will not be always present in the news. We hope that our military conflict, the war with Russia, which is part of this interest, will not last forever. And that means that this window of opportunities should be used. An example is the situation with the Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary. There was a lot of attention to that in the 60s and 70s. And today, They disappeared from the news in the US. Interest to this region, to these countries is now lower. If everything is fine in our country, the same will happen to us. And today, tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow, we'll be able to change something when people are ready to hear us, to listen to us. And again, the fact that Ukraine is at this cultural platform is very important, and I would like to thank everyone who joined us. Ukraine comes with some financial resource, which is small, but the Ukraine comes not just as a country that is asking for something. Thank you, Serhii. That coincides with our observations.
So resources of the Ukrainian Institute are small, but even the small resources highly assessed due to its availability, because it is available, and when you come to your partners with a proposal and some resource, some starting capital, then they speak with you, because we do not ask for anything. We are partners. That's why I like the words you've said. Could you comment on this window of opportunities that may narrow or may close for Ukraine during the next years? Maybe we should increase this interest to Ukraine, not only Ukraine as a state, but maybe Ukrainian actors are able to attract attention to the country, or to provide information to foreign counterparts in a proper way about Ukraine, in order to make them proponents of Ukraine. Our diplomats are dealing usually with diplomacy that is not public diplomacy. From what I know, this window of opportunity, this interest to Ukraine was used. And we face some extreme situations when there is an issue of war, the issue of negotiations, economic help, and it is easy to lose cultural element in all of this. I know that recently addresses increased concerning requests from Ukrainian embassy in Washington. This activity increases, and I cannot bring an example where some breakthrough was reached, some big event. The embassy actively cooperates with Nalywajko Foundation. There are some awards. There is room for improvement, but I cannot tell you about even one case of smashing success. And I believe that this window of opportunity is still open, and we have this room for success. I would like to speak with Katie now. Ukrainian Institute in America for a long time has been implementing this function of cultural ambassador in US, and I would like, first of all, to ask you about the results, the recommendations concerning this report. And I would like to hear about your experience concerning work with Ukrainian culture and how it is presented to American audience, and about the conclusions of our research, whether they are in agreement with your experience, with your work. And I know that you will speak English, and there is a small remark. You may turn off the sound and in order not to hear both yourself and simultaneous translation. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you for allowing me speaking English. Do you hear me? Yes, thank you.
So, to answer your question, or to begin to answer it,
Тепер щось зараз перервався звук.
okay. I would definitely echo many of the because, there's definitely the diaspora plays an enormous role in the success here in the United States. Everybody's, the diaspora is walking. There are many different, immigration waves, and so everybody comes from a different. So even all the diaspora is not a unified group, it's a disparate group with different connections.
Пані Кейті, я дуже перепрошую.
I would say that, from all the findings and the suggestions that we are not at a crossroads, but I think we have the greatest opportunity now to really reach out to the American community, and we've been doing that here for over 70 years. So, for example, I'm sitting in the Ukrainian Institute of America right now. We own a plastic building on the corner of 70th Street and Fifth Avenue, and that makes a difference. Our founder, William Jews, understood in order to get the type of respect from the local community, from the non-Ukrainian community, we really need to make this that had nothing to do actually with our culture, our history, our art, our music, but it was the wrapping in which it came. And I think that has made a very big difference for us. In fact, yesterday I was on a different, and it had to do with China, and I was broadcasting from my virtual room, the Ukrainian Institute, and people immediately said, "What's that room? Where are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm and out of 8 people in the breakout room, 6 of them said, "Oh, I've been there. My daughter performed there. I took my wedding pictures in front of there because my family is originally from Ukraine." And I believe the architect of your building is the same architect as the Jewish museum. So suddenly, came this conversation about Ukrainian and Ukrainian culture and how the Ukrainian Institute was founded and what we do, instead of talking about China, which was I would also say that, we have an opportunity, I think, that was not highlighted in the paper, which is to really, to focus on excellence in business that Ukrainians have, especially in technology. So if you think about, all of the amazing companies that have been founded by Ukrainian founders, so I think that's an opportunity to use that as a book for people to become Ukrainian is and what Ukrainians do. So to me, that is a real opportunity. Did you want me to continue, or did you have another question?
Ні, пані Кеті, у вас якісь проблеми зараз були зі звуком? Можливо, що зі зв'язком? Деякі слова просто...
Some words were lost, but we understood overall what you were speaking about, but there were some breaks in communication. Maybe I hear interpreter. We understood, but there were some interruptions in communication, maybe something with connection. We hope that we will have a more stable connection. And
did you want me to continue and just make some other observations, or did you have a separate question for me?
You can continue. You can, please do, or you can ask also questions to the other panelists as well.
So, I mean, just I had been thinking about sort of what the paper had, the findings in the paper and some of the things maybe where I thought some of the issues that weren't addressed. Professor Plokhii had actually addressed one of them, which is that kind of like I was thinking, it's really great to have this strategic plan, but it's also very important to be tactical. And the fact, as he highlighted, because we are in the news now, we have this window of opportunity. So, having a strategic plan is one thing, but maybe accelerating it, when you can take advantage tactically of situations, I think is very important as part of the long-term plan for Ukraine and, for having people really understand who we are and put us kind of, on a really world-class kind of level in terms of their thinking. Another thing that really struck me is that, as Pani Hanna had mentioned, that many of the negative associations have to do with political corruption and also perceived weakness, and vis-a-vis Russia, of course. And that puts us in a victim role as opposed to a survivor role. And the one thing growing up as a first-generation Ukrainian American here is, I never really got the sense from any of my parents or grandparents or the people in the diaspora, they never felt like victims. They felt like they were survivors. And so I think that's a really important kind of messaging twist that needs to happen somehow. And I think that would really be very helpful in terms of how we're perceived. And then actually just, I know you asked Professor Plokhii about, kind of can he come up with an example or a window of opportunity? This is a very minor one, and it certainly isn't a ground shifting one, but I do recall, back in 1992 during the Olympics, when Viktor Petrenko won, the gold medal for ice skating, and then subsequently Oksana Bayul did. And that was, of course, right around the time that, Ukraine was regaining its independence. Everybody started talking about Ukraine. So, there are ways to hook people in that have nothing to do with the actual kind of goal maybe, but they're interested enough in something else that's going on in the news to then start to, dig a little deeper and become a little bit more engaged and aware. So I guess that's really, that's all I have to say. And I would love to ask the panelists a couple of questions if they have time, if we have time.
Так, будь ласка, у нас є ще хвилин 10 точно.
Yes, we have 10 more minutes for discussion.
So, in terms of, where we are in the world right now and, understanding that, it's not a one-size-fits-all message and that different messages appeal to different countries and to different subgroups of people within countries. What role do you feel that technology can play to either unify, accelerate, or perhaps even to possibly open up additional room for misinformation? I mean, we're, in a world where, traditional PR is taking on a very different role. So, on the one hand, you can sort of embark on a PR campaign and it could actually cost you a lot less because, you have the ability to use, social media platforms. On the other hand, it does open up the opportunity for a lot of information or misinformation. So just your thoughts on technology and its role and how it might help or hurt in this effort.
Пані Кеті, кому адресовано ваше питання?
I'll actually to both, but first to Professor Plokhii, please.
Пане Сергію, питання до вас.
Так, дякую за питання.
Thank you for your question.
Я думаю, що ми всі побачили
I think that we have seen during the last year
саме можливість спілкуватися
that opportunity to communicate is very important. Borders disappeared. We may speak through the platforms. This is the reality of life for institutions, and this is a powerful factor to overcome the borders.
можливості ці технічні
These technical opportunities, we had them a year ago, but they were not used. And when we return to a normal format, we should not lose our communication skills that we have, because this is a powerful unit to unite these opportunities and to present Ukrainian technology, Ukrainian culture, or achievements in the sphere of IT technologies or other spheres. This is a positive that we should preserve.
всіх поганих речей подарував ковід.
And COVID brought many bad things, but this was the only thing that was really great.
Думаю, що це якраз той
About information and disinformation. So Ukraine is at the front line of this fight, and
власне звертав на це увагу кілька
and I focused my attention on this, that the United States, they should study this experience of Ukraine in countering disinformation, and this was one of the factors where Ukraine may provide example. And we have such a problem, and we are not the only one in US and in the world. Everyone faces this problem, and we need to reinforce our cooperation on this. And once again, we should speak about what is going on inside the country in this context, because the ways of disinformation, the ways of manipulation, they will continue. 3 or 4 years we were at the front line, and we remain at the front line. And we will share this with the world, but we need support of the world to fight against disinformation. So this is my response, and I thank you for your question. Would you like to add something? Thank you very much. Several things. First, speaking about overall perception in US, maybe there will be some difference in opinion, but we wanted to see the perception of Ukrainian culture in a broad sense, including education, public diplomacy, and other issues connected with them. And our research has shown that associations and messages that should be promoted in US, many people said that innovations are important, new technologies are important, and Ukraine has good results in IT. So Ukraine should be promoted as a country of success. We should speak about successful stories, and people mentioned those areas that are connected not with the cultural sphere, mainly with the technology. And at that, many people mentioned modern Ukrainian culture as a story of success. Also, Ukrainian cinema, new Ukrainian cinema, that could be of interest to Americans. And here, I believe that this conclusion is really important. The United States, they believe that the image of the country is formed not only based on cultural dimension. Here, political and overall social and cultural messages or knowledge, they are a basis on which we may impose the layer of culture, and there should be general interest to Ukraine as a modern state. And I really liked your opinion about victim and survivor. I really like this idea.
But That is what many of our respondents were talking about, and it was interesting to ask not just from Ukrainian diaspora, but we were asking the representatives of Russian, Belarusian, and Mexican diaspora. And they look at what's happening as well, and they were also talking about that, the perception of Ukraine, those who managed to survive, those who are survivors. They looked at them as someone who's fighting the enemy now in the east or in the Crimea. That's image, that's perception of Ukraine was like a golden thread going through all the interviews, and many were talking about the experience of Ukraine. Ukraine and the US could be interesting not as the subject of scandal with Trump, but also we can talk about Ukraine as the country that has experience, which it can share with the US. There's a professor from Los Angeles who said that Ukrainian examples are what my colleagues are underestimating. They are not ready to understand how Ukraine managed to overcome some of the difficulties, and that Ukrainian society has to pay attention to that. They have to learn how social media could either help the state or the society or just have a negative impact. And that is why I emphasize that please read the quotations, not just the conclusions. The quotations demonstrate how Americans could be ready to better perceive Ukraine and to know more about Ukraine. You were talking also about streaming services. We were saying that if you are not in Hollywood, you are not in the US, but today that's quite an obsolete notion, but we believe that there should be more Ukrainian films in Netflix with the English subtitles. That is some cultural element. First, they will not think that this is Ukrainian film. They will just look at it as something new. But this way, not just experts, but general audience will learn more. And that means that we need to ask ourselves, how can Ukraine find new channels of communications and new messages that would be perceived by American society, understanding how different cities or different layers of population could be interested in different things. And that is very important for the US. Any information campaign should start from clear definition of what is our target audience. Thank you for your replies and for your very good questions. We don't have more time to continue our discussion. We just have several more minutes, and in the end, I would like to ask Kathy a question, taking into account what we were talking about. What do you believe? What is the most, the cultural content from Ukraine which would be in the demand, which would be perceived the best by American audience, understanding that these are different audiences, in fact. But from your professional point of view, from the results of this survey, what do you believe? Could Ukraine use which cultural potential could Ukraine use for these communications to reach their viewer, their listener, their target audience?
I understand your question. Are you asking which medium, which message would work best?
I mean, which sort of types of cultural content and cultural products
Okay, that's what I thought you were
would be
asking.
most welcome, most, sought
So
after?
I think that, probably the top three. So just in terms of, I think as Pani Hanna, was referring to film, I think film is very popular now, and it's, especially with a lot of people on their computers and the ability to stream. I think that is, that is a medium and a cultural avenue that has not been as explored already. I mean, we have been focusing on music and art here at the Institute for a very long time. We've added films and books and, and all those types of things as well. Yeah, I think people are also very interested in hearing about, what is going on, like just informational. So I would say that, panel discussions on, on topics where you can really get granular, in terms of, difficult topics to talk about that people don't like to talk about, and not just, kind of just broad what's going on in Ukraine, but, some of our most popular, webinars that we've had here had to do with, when COVID unfolded, what's going, what is happening in Ukraine? What steps is Ukraine taking? I think that, people are interested in kind of granular discussions about what is going on in Ukraine. I realize that's not exactly a cultural message, but I do think that if you talk about, let's say, again, what's happening in various parts of the art world, or parts of the, the film world, things that people want to hear details, and Zoom gives them the opportunity to do so, and then you can do it globally. I think art also is a very big opportunity as well, especially since, there's so much opportunity in digital art now. So I think, and there will probably be new cultural mediums that are still to be developed as we move forward and technology accelerates. So I think that those are where the opportunities lie.
Дуже дякую, пані Кеті.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, all the participants of this discussion. We didn't have enough time to discuss it. I hope that we'll continue these discussions individually. Ukrainian Institute will take the results of this survey, because we are planning our work in the US. I thank you for this discussion. I believe that it is not over. I would like to remind you that these were presentations of the first three analytical surveys of how Ukraine is perceived abroad in Japan, Turkey, and the US. We'll continue this series in a few weeks in the UCMC. We'll be talking about Poland, Germany, France, and Hungary, where we also got some very unexpected results. Thank you all for being with us today, and goodbye.